If you haven't seen Squid Game yet, go check it out on Netflix or your favorite streaming site because it is a very well-produced series that will surely have a season 2 eventually. And by then, you don't want to be the only one that hasn't seen it like those that never got started on Game of Thrones. So this is your last warning if you haven't seen Squid Game, as there are spoilers ahead as I explain the nuances in the series that you may not have understood if you've never lived in Korea or don't have any connections whatsoever to the country and or culture. Let's start with the actual game, Squid Game. Is this a real game that kids play in Korea? The answer is yes and no. Yes, kids used to play this 3 or 4 decades ago, but as you can imagine, it can be quite violent. So parents basically stepped in a while back and unofficially banned the game. Maybe we'll see a comeback among middle school kids because of the series, but who knows. Also, note the playground or field they're playing on is dirt. Nowadays, it's pretty rare to see dirt fields at schools or playgrounds. Now they're mostly AstroTurf or compressed rubber for safety's sake, and I guess cleanliness as well. Notice Gi-hun is sitting on the floor while eating. This was very normal in Korea, probably right up until about 20 years ago. These days, most homes do have dining tables and chairs, but some lower-class families still sit on the floor while eating, and they're probably trying to depict that subtly in this scene. The bank scene, when Gi-hun is trying to figure out his mother's PIN number, his friend suggests trying her birthday, which makes him pause, and then his friend mocks him for not knowing his own mother's birthday. Gi-hun's response is that she celebrates her birthday using the lunar calendar, which a lot of people do, especially elderly people. Dates on the lunar calendar are different on the solar calendar year to year, so it definitely can be confusing, but then again, the lunar calendar date would just be the same, so he actually should still know the date. The horse race track is an actual place in Seoul, or I should say in Gwacheon, which is a suburb adjacent to Seoul just to the south. Anyone can go and bet, including foreigners, and in fact, they actually have a VIP section just for foreigners. So if you're ever in Korea, that's a place you could check out, and I may even do a future video highlighting Korea's horse race track, so make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. When Gi-hun gets paid, he gets 91 50,000 won bills. So 50,000 won bills are the largest bills they print in Korea, mostly because they want to make it difficult to bribe people, which used to be very common, especially way back in the day. It wasn't until about 15 years ago that the 50,000 won bill was actually created. Before that, the largest denomination was the 10,000 won bill, which is only equivalent to about $10 US. So basically, the easiest way to translate Korean won into US dollars is knock off 3 zeros. So the 4.56 million won that he won on the races was actually around $4,500, and the total prize money later in the show is around $45 million. And also the 10,000 won tip that he gives to the girl is basically about $10. Gi-hun's debtor tells him to stamp his fingerprint on the physical waiver contract. In formal Korean contracts, especially the further back in history you go, they're often stamped with a personal seal rather than a signature. You do see more and more signatures these days, but back in the day, and more often than not still, everyone will actually have a stamp carved out that they use for documents. And if you don't have that on you at the time, then as a backup, they may accept the stamping of your fingerprint as a sign of consent rather than a signature. I've definitely done that on a contract before moving in to a new apartment. I don't know if you have these crane games in your country, but they are all the rage in Korea. You can find them in every neighborhood in Korea, small suburban areas, as well as the busiest and most expensive neighborhoods. They're all 24 hours and can be seen filled with kids, couples on dates, or drunk old guys as well. Gi-hoon and his daughter are eating in what we call a Pojangmacha, or a food stand, can also be a tent bar as well. It's basically the cheapest way to buy a meal in Korea. They're eating tteokbokki in particular, which is rice cake in a spicy sauce, and this probably costs $1 or $2 at most for what they're eating. When Gi-hoon promises to quit smoking and buy her a better present next year, he sticks out his pinky finger for a pinky promise. Now, a pinky promise is like Scout's honor or swearing on your friendship or whatever else important things that you can claim a promise on. And it's definitely more prevalent in Korean culture compared to other cultures that I've seen, even if you do have a pinky promise in that culture. It's something that's very often used among friends and family and even kids on the playground or what have you. When Gi-hoon takes his daughter home to his ex-wife, you can see that they live in an apartment building and probably an apartment complex. It shows that his ex-wife is at least living a middle-class life compared to how Gi-hoon is living. Also, the subway station he misses the train at is in Yangjae, which is in the Gangnam district, which is a more affluent area compared to other neighborhoods of Seoul. The actor who approaches Gi-hoon to scout him for the game is Kongnu. He's a well-established actor, especially as of late, and when he appeared this early in the series, you automatically assumed he was going to have a bigger role in the series than he ended up with, basically. It really isn't very often that you see someone as big as Kongnu essentially making a cameo appearance and then not being seen again until the very end. So I thought for sure that he would end up being the front man, although more on that later, perhaps in a later episode. As for the game they play in the subway station, this is a very popular game with kids, especially elementary school kids. Although they don't use the old school paper dakjis, nowadays they have more modern versions made of rubber or silicone. And I remember these being really big with Pokemon cards back in the days, as you would play dakji to win Pokemon cards off your friends. And they had Pokemon versions of those dakji things, like in silicone form, to play with. When it's discovered Gi-hoon doesn't have any money to pay for his losses, he accepts to be slapped instead. Now, there are a lot of different games. I mean, even for something as simple as rock, scissors, paper, where kids and even adults, for fun, will play for 2-finger slaps on the wrist or a finger flick on the forehead or other physical punishments. Although obviously, no one's going to accept slapping you instead of accepting $100. The scene where Gi-hoon receives the business card, if you watch this on Netflix right now, you'll notice that the number has been edited to 010034. This is because a ridiculous number of people called the original number, perhaps hoping that there were really an opportunity like in this show, while some others were probably just prank calling. So the producers eventually edited the number to help out the poor fellow with that infamous phone number. As the man leaves on the subway, you can see his lips saying, fighting. That's a Konglish term that Koreans use to try to encourage you, sort of like go in English. You know, it's an English word, but it's used incorrectly, and it's more often than not pronounced "hoiting" rather than fighting because there's no F sound in the Korean alphabet. When Gi-hun meets Sang-woo's mother, he claims that he helped Sang-woo get into Seoul National University. You'll notice the picture they showed of Sang-woo and his mother was of Sang-woo graduating. This is because there are few things to be more proud of in Korea than your child graduating from Seoul National University. Comparing that to saying your son graduated from Harvard or Yale in North America absolutely pales in comparison, because Korea is such an education-focused society. It'd be more like saying my son just got drafted by the New York Yankees or Dallas Cowboys or LA Lakers. Definitely more appropriate. Also note that there are a lot of prestigious universities in the U.S., whereas the drop-off from saying you graduated from Seoul National University compared to other top Korean universities like Yonsei or Korea University is miles apart. When Gi-hun feeds this stray cat, it reminds me just how many stray cats there are in Seoul. I'm from Vancouver, where I don't know if I've ever seen a stray cat, and if I have, very, very few. But there definitely are a lot of stray cats in Korea. Often kids have their neighborhood strays that they regularly feed. This is the classic Korean pose for pictures. Well, almost. Instead of the backhanded V, it's usually the front-facing V, or like the peace sign. But perhaps it's become so cliche that younger kids are going backhanded now. But anyways, if you look at any Korean's Instagram, they'll be sure to have a few poses at least with the front-facing peace sign. You can see that Deok-soo has tattoos on his body and even partially on his face. Now, it may seem obvious that the producers gave him tattoos to make him seem tougher. And while that's obviously true, it's also to show that he's officially a gangster or a thug. Tattoos are technically illegal in Korea, although there have been recent proposals to legalize the practice, especially since so many mainstream athletes and celebrities have been painting themselves as of late. But back in the day, it was much more difficult to get a tattoo even in Korea. And tattoos, along with cigarettes, for instance, are blurred out on mainstream TV in Korea. So it was typically something that only official thugs or gangsters would have on their body. And sometimes you wouldn't even notice because, it's covered up. But when they show Deok-soo in this particular case, they're trying to make it very obvious of his personality and character. The name of the first episode is Green Light, Red Light, and it was also the password Gi-hun said before getting into the van, and it's also the name of the first game. In Korean, though, the translation is completely different. It's named 무궁화 꽃이 피었습니다, which literally translates to the rose of Sharon has bloomed. The 무궁화 꽃 is the rose of Sharon, and that's the Korean national flower. It'd be like the maple leaf is to Canada. So that's the line that she says. Now, the reason the translators chose red light, green light is because it's the closest way to explain the game that they're playing. So the robotic girl says, 무궁화 꽃이 피었습니다. And while she's saying that line, that's when you're allowed to move, and when she's not looking. But when she turns around after completing the line, then you have to stand still or you go back to the starting point in terms of the children's game. So it's an elementary school game that everyone in Korea plays way back when and still to this day. And it'd be as common as like hide and seek or tag when it comes to being a playground game. And no, you don't get shot by a sniper rifle if you move. Now, there were actually way more things to cover than I thought, so I'm going to have to divide this up into per episode. So make sure you subscribe to my channel so you know as soon as I update the latest episodes on this series. Also, if you're familiar with Korean culture and noticed any Korean nuances that I missed, please do leave your comments, or if you have anything further to add to what I've already covered, please do so as well. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe. Please?